The day started with the kind of sunlight that feels mocking when you're carrying a secret as heavy as mine. It was a crisp Saturday in October, the sky a piercing, relentless blue that demanded cheerfulness. I woke up before the alarm, my body humming with a frequency that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. 6 a.m. The digital numbers on the bedside clock glared at me. Beside me, Mark was a lump under the duvet, breathing in that deep, rhythmic way that used to comfort me but lately just made me feel isolated. He could sleep. He could turn off his brain. I hadn't turned off my brain in 5 years. I lay there for 20 minutes, just staring at the ceiling, tracing the familiar hairline crack in the plaster that looked like a lightning bolt. Today was the day, the monthly family dinner at Susan and Bob's house. Usually, these dinners were a masterclass in passive aggression and endurance, a 3-hour marathon of dodging questions about our timeline and listening to Jessica brag about her promotion, her new car, her perfect lawn, her perfect life. But today was going to be different. Today, I had armor. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards cool under my bare feet, and tiptoed to the closet. I needed to verify it was still there. I reached into the back, behind the winter coats we hadn't worn since our trip to Vermont, and pulled out my large, structured leather tote. My hands were shaking, a fine, tremulous vibration, as I unzipped the inner pocket. There it was, the manila envelope. It wasn't much to look at, just paper and ink, but it felt like it pulsated with its own heartbeat. Finalization of adoption petition and the placement confirmation letter. Twins, Leo and Maya. Those names had been rolling around in my mouth like sweet candies for weeks, ever since the agency called us. They were real. They were 6 months old, currently in foster care, and barring any catastrophic legal disaster, they were going to be ours next month. We had passed the home study, the background checks, the interviews that felt like interrogations into our souls. We had matched. It was done. But we hadn't told a soul. Not Susan, not Bob, certainly not Jessica. And, strictly speaking, Mark knew, obviously, he had signed the papers, but he had been weird about it, distant. He kept saying he didn't want to jinx it by talking about it, didn't want to celebrate until they were physically in our house. I understood that fear, God knows I did, but his silence felt different this time. It felt like reluctance, or maybe shame. I pushed that thought away. I wouldn't let his emotional constipation ruin this. I touched the paper one last time, grounding myself, then zipped the bag shut. Getting ready was a production. I spent 45 minutes on my makeup, layering foundation to hide the dark circles that were permanent residents under my eyes now. I chose a dress that made me feel powerful, a deep navy wrap dress that hugged my curves but felt professional, serious. I wasn't going there as the barren sister-in-law today. I was going as a mother-in-waiting. I was going as a woman who had fought a war and won, even if nobody else knew it yet. When I went downstairs, Mark was drinking coffee at the island, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Coffee's in the pot," he mumbled. "Thanks," I said, pouring a mug. The liquid was bitter, burnt. He must have used too many grounds. "Are you ready for tonight?" I asked, leaning against the counter, trying to catch his eye. He shrugged, still scrolling. "It's just dinner, Nina. Don't make it a thing." "I'm not making it a thing," I said, feeling that familiar prickle of irritation. "But we have the news. Should we tell them tonight?" Mark finally looked up, and his expression was unreadable, flat. "Let's just see how the night goes, okay? I don't want to make a scene if Jessica is on one of her rants." I bit my lip. "Okay, we'll play it by ear," I lied. I had every intention of telling them. I wanted to see the look on Jessica's face. I wanted to see Susan cry happy tears instead of pity ones. I wanted to change the narrative of our lives from tragedy to triumph. The drive to his parents' house was excruciatingly quiet. The radio was broken, so we were left with the sound of the tires on the asphalt and the wind whistling through a gap in the windowsill. I stared out the window at the passing suburbs, the trees blazing with autumn colors, burning reds, dying oranges. It felt like the world was on fire. Every time I looked at Mark, his jaw was set tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He looked like he was driving to a funeral, not a family dinner. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, about 10 minutes away from their house. "I'm fine," he snapped, then sighed. "Sorry, work stress, you know." I didn't know. He hadn't talked to me about work in months. We were like two ghosts haunting the same house, bound together by a history of trauma that we couldn't escape. But the twins were going to fix this. They had to. They would bring the noise and the chaos and the love back into our silent rooms. They would make us a family again, instead of just a couple surviving. We pulled into the driveway. Jessica's car was already there, a pristine white SUV that looked like it had just rolled off the lot. Of course, she was always early. I took a deep breath, grabbing my tote bag from the back seat. "Why are you bringing that inside?" Mark asked, frowning at the bag. "I have some work things I might need to check." I lied again. I couldn't leave the papers in the car. They were my talisman. I needed them close. We walked up the path to the front door. I could hear laughter coming from inside. My stomach twisted. That specific high-pitched laugh? Jessica. She was already holding court. Mark opened the door, and the smell of roast beef and rosemary hit me like a physical wall. It was the smell of family, a scent that used to make me feel warm and safe, but now just made me nauseous. Susan came bustling out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "There they are," she exclaimed, giving Mark a crushing hug and then offering me a polite side hug. Come in, come in. Jessica has wonderful news." My blood ran cold. Wonderful news? There was only one kind of wonderful news that got announced at these dinners. I looked at Mark. He was staring at the floor again. He knew. He must have known. He talked to his mother earlier today. Why didn't he warn me? We walked into the living room. Jessica was sitting on the sofa, her husband, Dave, beaming beside her. She was wearing a tight beige dress that showed off nothing. She looked the same as always, but she was glowing. That insufferable hormonal glow that screams, "I am creating life and you are just consuming oxygen." "Nina, Mark," she squealed, clapping her hands. "We were waiting for you." We sat down. I clutched my bag to my chest. "What's the news?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow, robotic. Jessica looked at Dave, then back at us. She placed a hand dramatically on her flat stomach. "Well," she started, dragging out the syllable, "we didn't want to say anything until we were sure, but we're pregnant." The room erupted. Susan shrieked. Bob clapped Dave on the back. Mark forced a smile and said, "Congrats, guys." I sat there, frozen. It was like a bomb had gone off, and I was the only one feeling the shrapnel. Pregnant. Again. They already had a 2-year-old. It was so easy for them. They just decided, and it happened. Meanwhile, my body was a graveyard. I forced the muscles in my face to construct a smile. It felt like a grimace. "Congratulations. That's amazing." Dinner was a blur. I moved food around my plate, trying to make it look like I was eating. The conversation revolved entirely around the fetus. Due dates, nursery themes, names, morning sickness. Jessica complained about her nausea for 20 minutes straight, describing it in graphic detail, while I sat there remembering the time I threw up from the pain of a miscarriage and nobody was there to hold my hair. I was drowning in their joy. I felt invisible. I felt defective. And then it happened. The lull in conversation. I was staring at my green beans, trying to summon the energy to take a bite, when Jessica's voice cut through the haze. She was looking right at me. Her eyes weren't kind. They were predatory. "You're being very quiet, Nina," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I'm just tired," I managed to say. "Long week." Jessica swirled her cider. "You know," she said, leaning forward, "I was telling Susan earlier, I'm just so grateful that my body works the way it's supposed to. It's such a blessing." I stiffened. "Don't take the bait, Nina. Don't do it." "It is a blessing," I said tightly. And then she delivered the killing blow. Unlike some people, we can actually have children. The sentence hung suspended in the air above the centerpiece of white lilies and half-eaten roast beef, vibrating with a cruelty so casual, so nonchalantly delivered, that it took a full 3 seconds for the meaning to truly pierce the skin of my shock. I watched Jessica's lips, painted a glossy, triumphant shade of crimson, curl into that self-satisfied smirk I had come to loathe in the deepest, darkest pits of my soul. She picked up her wineglass, sparkling cider, obviously, because she was the vessel of life now, and took a sip, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim. It wasn't just a jab, it was an execution, a public evisceration performed with the dullest, rustiest blade she could find, right there between the mashed potatoes and the gravy boat. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold wash of numbness starting at my fingertips and racing toward my chest. My hand, which had been halfway to my mouth with a fork full of green beans, froze. The fork slipped. It clattered against the fine china, a sharp, discordant ting that echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous dining room. Everyone stopped. My mother-in-law, Susan, paused with her napkin halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide, darting between Jessica and me. My father-in-law cleared his throat, a low rumble of discomfort that signaled he would rather be anywhere else on the planet than at the head of this table. But I didn't look at them. I looked at Mark, my husband. The man who had held me on the bathroom floor 3 separate times while I screamed into a towel so the neighbors wouldn't hear the sound of my heart breaking. The man who had seen the blood, the ultrasound screens that turned from hopeful gray static to silent tombs. I looked at him, desperate for a shield, for a defense, for a single word of outrage. He was looking at his plate. He was cutting a piece of meat. Slowly, methodically, as if the geometry of the slice was the most important thing in the universe. He didn't look up. He didn't say, "That's enough, Jessica." He didn't squeeze my hand under the table. He did nothing. Absolutely nothing. The betrayal of his silence was louder than Jessica's voice had been. It screamed that I was alone, that in this war of wombs and worthiness, I was a casualty he wasn't willing to save. The tears came then, not as a gentle weep, but as a hot, stinging surge that blurred the room into a watercolor nightmare. The air felt too thin to breathe. I needed out. I needed air. I needed to scream. Wait, let me rewind. I need to tell you how we got to the specific hellscape, because if you think this moment was just a spontaneous combustion of family drama, you don't know the half of it. You don't know about the morning, or the folder burning a hole in my oversized tote bag, or the secret that had been keeping me alive for the last 4 weeks. But before that sentence detonated in the center of the dining room, shredding the last remnants of my composure, there was the silence. Not the stunned silence that followed the insult, but the creeping, insidious silence that had been filling the corners of that house from the moment we stepped across the threshold. You know the kind I'm talking about. It's the silence that isn't actually quiet. It's the static in the air, the hum of a refrigerator that sounds a little too aggressive, the way dust motes dance in the late afternoon sun like they're trying to warn you. If I had been paying attention, if I hadn't been so wrapped up in the weight of the leather tote bag sitting by my feet, guarding the adoption papers like they were nuclear codes, I would have felt the tremors. I would have seen that the fault lines beneath this family were already shifting, preparing to swallow me whole. Let's go back to the hour before we sat down. The cocktail hour, as Susan likes to call it, though nobody ever drinks cocktails. It's always tepid white wine for the ladies and artisanal beer for the men, served in the living room that feels less like a place for humans to inhabit and more like a museum exhibit dedicated to the concept of beige. The atmosphere in that room has always been oppressive, but today it felt heavy, physically dense, like the air pressure dropped 10 degrees the second we walked in. The house smelled of that aggressive synthetic cinnamon potpourri Susan buys in bulk, layered over the slow roast scent of the beef. It was cloying, It stuck to the back of my throat. I remember standing by the fireplace, which has never held a fire in the 30 years they've lived there, just a pristine arrangement of birch logs that look like they've been scrubbed with bleach. I was tracing the pattern on the mantel, a line of porcelain shepherdesses that have always creeped me out, and trying to regulate my breathing. Everything felt disjointed. The textures of the evening were wrong. Usually, Susan is a whirlwind of nervous energy, fluttering around with coasters and napkins, asking 20 questions about our jobs, our commute, our lawn care. But today, she was stationary. She sat in her high-backed wing chair, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were the color of old parchment. She kept looking at me. Not looking at me, but looking through me, with this wet, pitying gaze that made my skin crawl. Every time our eyes met, she'd flinch and look away, directing her attention to the window or the carpet or the hem of her skirt. It was the look you give a dog right before you take it to the vet to be put down. It made me want to scream. And Mark. God, Mark. He was standing by the sliding glass door that leads to the patio, staring out at the backyard like he was planning an escape route. He held his beer bottle by the neck, peeling the label off in long, satisfying strips. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was maddening in the quiet room. He wasn't engaging with his father, who was droning on about the fluctuating price of lumber. Mark was vibrating. I could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the way his neck muscles bunched up every time Jessica laughed from the other side of the room. He knew. I realized it then, watching the condensation drip from his bottle onto the pristine hardwood floor. He knew something. I didn't. Or maybe he just knew that tonight was going to be a bloodbath, and he had forgotten to bring the bandages. I needed to escape the living room. The air was too thick, the subtext too loud. "I'm going to see if Susan needs help in the kitchen," I announced, my voice sounding too bright, too brittle. Mark didn't turn around. He just gave a slight nod, a jerky motion that didn't acknowledge me as a person, just as a source of noise. I walked into the kitchen. It was a relief, briefly, to be out of the direct line of fire of Jessica's smugness. The kitchen was warm, steamy from the oven. Susan had followed me in, ostensibly to check the gravy, but I knew she was hovering. I leaned against the granite island, cold, hard, unyielding against my lower back, and watched her stir the brown liquid in the saucepan. The spoon scraped against the metal. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a rhythm of anxiety. "It smells delicious, Susan," I said, trying to bridge the gap, trying to be the good daughter-in-law. She stopped stirring. She didn't look up. She stared into the vortex of the gravy. "Thank you, Nina. It's a special occasion." My stomach did a little flip. "Oh," I asked, feigning ignorance. "Is it?" I thought maybe she meant the twins. A wild, irrational part of my brain thought, did Mark tell her? Is this the surprise? Are they happy for us? She finally looked up, and her eyes were swimming. Not with happiness, but with that same excruciating pity. She reached out and patted my hand. Her skin was dry, papery, cool to the touch. "We just want everyone to be happy, Nina. That's all a mother ever wants, for all her children to be happy." "I want that too," I said slowly, pulling my hand back under the pretense of tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I think happiness is finally coming our way." I was hinting. I was dropping breadcrumbs. I wanted her to ask me. I wanted to pull the papers out right there, amidst the smell of rosemary and beef fat, and say, look at what we did." But she didn't ask. She flinched. A tiny, microscopic spasm of her facial muscles. "Yes," she whispered. "Well, sometimes happiness looks different than we expect." She turned back to the stove abruptly, aggressively increasing the speed of her stirring. "Could you get the serving spoons from the dining room, dear?" Dismissed. I had been dismissed. I walked back through the hallway to the dining room. The runner rug was slightly askew. I stopped to fix it with my toe. It wouldn't lay flat. Nothing in this house was laying flat today. When I entered the dining room to get the spoons from the sideboard, I heard them. Jessica and Dave. They were in the hallway near the powder room, just out of sight of the main living area. They must have thought I was still in the kitchen with Susan. Their voices were hushed, that sharp, sibilant whisper that carried further than a shout. "She's going to lose it," Dave was saying. His voice was low, rumbly, lacking the malicious edge that Jessica's carried. "No," Jessica hissed. I froze. I stopped breathing. I stood there by the china cabinet, my reflection distorted in the glass, a ghost in a navy dress. "We are not waiting, Dave. I am not hiding my joy just because she's broken. It's been 3 years. At some point, life has to move on. Besides, Mom said she's been weirdly chipper lately. She's probably in denial again. It's better to just rip the Band-Aid off." Broken. The word hung in the air, suspended in the dust motes. She called me broken. Not sad, not struggling. Broken. Like a toy with a missing wheel. Like a vase that had been glued back together too many times to hold water. My hand gripped the edge of the sideboard so hard my fingernails dug into the wood. I felt a surge of heat rush up my neck, a mix of shame and a pure, white-hot rage that felt almost cleansing. Denial. She thought I was in denial. She thought my happiness, my chipper attitude, was a delusion. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea that while she was whispering about me in the hallway, I was carrying the legal proof that I was a mother. I wasn't broken. I was building. But hearing her say it, hearing the casual cruelty of it, it made the secret in my bag feel less like a surprise and more like a weapon. I realized then that I wasn't just going to announce the adoption, I was going to deploy it. I grabbed the serving spoons, heavy silver ones with intricate floral patterns, and clattered them together intentionally. I stepped out into the hallway. Jessica jumped. She spun around, her hand flying to her chest, to the neckline of that beige dress. Her eyes went wide, scanning my face to see how much I'd heard. "Hey," I said. My voice was dead calm. It scared me a little. "Susan needs these." Jessica let out a breathy, nervous laugh. "Ugh, you startled me, Nina. You're so quiet, like a mouse." "Just light on my feet," I said, holding her gaze. I didn't blink. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to see the broken woman standing tall. "Are you guys ready to eat? I'm starving." She narrowed her eyes, just a fraction. She was trying to read the map of my face, but I had folded it up and put it away. "Yes," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. That smirk I mentioned earlier. It wasn't a smile of friendliness. It was the smile of a poker player holding a royal flush. "We're ready. We're definitely ready." We walked back to the dining room together, but apart. The distance between our bodies was measured in light years. We sat down. The scraping of chairs against the floor sounded like bones breaking. Susan brought out the roast. Bob carved it. The sounds were magnified. The knife slicing through the meat. Shk, shk. The clinking of the ladle against the gravy boat. The glug, glug, glug of the wine being poured. I sat there, unfolding my napkin on my lap, smoothing out the creases over and over again. The fabric was linen, rough against my fingertips. I looked at the centerpiece, white lilies. Funeral flowers. Who puts lilies on a dinner table? The smell was overpowering, mixing with the roast beef to create a scent that was uniquely nauseating. Mark was sitting next to me. His leg was bouncing under the table, up and down, up and down. It was shaking the table slightly, making the water in my glass tremble. Ripples. Jurassic Park ripples. The T-Rex is coming. "Mark," I whispered, putting a hand on his knee to stop him. His leg muscles were rock hard, tense. He stopped, but he didn't look at me. He picked up his fork and stabbed a potato. "So," Bob said, clearing his throat. The sound was like a gavel banging. "Everyone having a good week? Work treating you okay, Nina?" It was the obligatory preamble, the warm-up act. "It's fine," I said. "Busy. We're wrapping up a big project." "Good, good," Bob nodded, not listening. He looked at Dave. And you, how's the new account? They talked about business for 10 minutes. I ate 3 green beans. They tasted like nothing, like wet cardboard. I was conscious of every chew, every swallow. I was conscious of the tote bag sitting near my feet, the leather cool against my ankle. I was waiting. We were all waiting. It was a performance, a charade of a family dinner. We were actors on a stage reciting lines we didn't mean, while the real script was burning a hole in Jessica's pocket. And then, the lull, the inevitable silence when the small talk runs out of oxygen. Jessica put down her fork. She wiped her mouth with her napkin, dab, 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 checking to make sure her lipstick hadn't smeared. She looked at Dave. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal, the executioner raising the axe. Actually, Jessica started, her voice pitching up an octave into that performative sweetness that sets my teeth on edge. We have some news. I saw Susan's hands tighten on the tablecloth. She knew. She definitely knew. She braced herself. I saw Mark stop chewing. He closed his eyes for a second, just a split second, as if praying for teleportation. I took a sip of water. The ice cube clinked against my teeth. Cold, sharp. We didn't want to say anything until we were sure, Jessica continued, her hand drifting to her stomach. The gesture was so cliché it felt scripted. But we're pregnant. The room exploded into the pre-planned celebration I described before. But now, armed with the context of the last hour, the pitying looks, the hushed whispers in the hallway about me being broken, the trembling of Mark's leg, the celebration felt grotesque. It wasn't just joy, it was relief. They were relieved that she was the one carrying the legacy. They were relieved to have a healthy pregnancy to celebrate, to wash away the awkward stain of my failures. I watched them. I watched Susan cry, her tears flowing a little too freely, as if she was releasing months of pent-up stress. I watched Bob shake Dave's hand vigorously. I watched Mark force that smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes, the one that looked like a grimace of pain. And then, the turn, the pivot, the moment Jessica decided that winning wasn't enough. She had to salt the earth. She turned to me. The room went quiet again. The air grew still. She looked at me with those predatory eyes, shimmering with malice disguised as triumph. Unlike some people, she said, the words sliding out of her mouth like oil. We can actually have children. The sentence hit me physically. It wasn't a sound, it was a shockwave. It punched the air out of my lungs. The cruelty was so precise, so targeted. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a thesis statement. She was establishing the hierarchy. She was the fertile queen, and I was the barren peasant, allowed at the table only by her grace. Time stopped. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Tick, tock, tick, tock. I looked at the lilies. I looked at the half-eaten roast beef. I looked at Mark. Mark, who was staring at his plate. Mark, who said nothing. Mark, who let the silence stretch and stretch until it strangled me. That was the moment. That was the fracture. It wasn't the miscarriage that broke us. It wasn't the years of trying. It was this silence. This specific, heavy, cowardly silence where my husband chose the path of least resistance over his wife's dignity. I felt the tears start. Not sadness, rage, liquid rage leaking out of my eyes. I stood up. The chair scraped back, a harsh, violent sound. I choked out. I didn't finish the sentence. I grabbed my bag. Not because I needed it for the bathroom, but because I needed the papers. I needed the ammunition. I walked out of the dining room, down the hall, into the powder room. I locked the door. I leaned against it, gasping for air, staring at myself in the mirror. My face was blotchy, my eyes were red. But beneath the tears, there was something else. A hardening, a crystallization. I unzipped the bag. I pulled out the folder. I looked at the names. Leo, Maya. They weren't just my children. They were my vindication. I wiped my face. I didn't fix my makeup. I wanted them to see the tracks of the tears. I wanted them to see the damage so they could understand the magnitude of the reconstruction. I unlocked the door. The click of the bathroom lock sliding into place sounded like a gunshot in a library, final, loud, and echoing with a permanence that made my knees weak. I didn't just lean against the door. I slid down it, the cool, painted wood scraping against the silk of my dress, friction burning my shoulder blades. I hit the floor, the cold, hexagonal tile floor that smelled faintly of lavender bleach and something musky like old damp towels, and I just sat there, knees to chest, breathing, or trying to breathe. It felt less like inhaling and more like drowning in reverse, the air refusing to enter my lungs, catching in my throat like a fishbone. 1, 2, 3, in. 1, 2, 3, out. It wasn't working. The room was spinning. This bathroom, this damn bathroom. It was a shrine to Susan's obsession with country chic. Wallpaper with tiny, suffocating rosebuds that seemed to be closing in on me, staring at me with thousands of little pink eyes. A wicker basket full of soaps shaped like seashells that nobody was ever allowed to use. A fuzzy pink toilet seat cover. It was grotesque. It was a padded salve for the domestic soul. I looked at the tote bag. It was sitting on the floor next to the pedestal sink, looking incongruous, like a briefcase in a nursery. My hands were shaking so violently that when I reached for the zipper, I missed, twice. My fingers felt numb, sausage-like, disconnected from my brain. I was vibrating with a frequency of rage that felt dangerous, like I could power a small city or burn this house to the ground just by touching the walls. I finally got a grip on the metal tab and yanked. The sound of the zipper opening, zzz, was the only honest sound I'd heard all night. I reached in. I needed the folder. I needed the proof. I needed to hold on to something that was real, something that wasn't a passive-aggressive comment or a pitying glance. My fingers brushed the manila cardstock. I pulled it out. And here is where things went wrong. Here is where the universe, in its infinite cosmic sense of humor, decided that my moment of triumph needed a dash of slapstick humiliation. In my haste, in my tremor-filled, adrenaline-soaked state, I didn't realize that the folder was upside down. I didn't realize the clasp wasn't fully bent back to secure the contents. I lifted it up, ready to clutch it to my chest like a shield, and gravity did the rest. The papers didn't just fall, they exploded. It was like a ticker tape parade of bureaucracy. The petition for adoption, the home study approval, the background check clearance, the medical records for the twins, and the photo. The single, precious 4x6 glossy photo of Leo and Maya that I had spent hours staring at, memorizing the curve of their cheeks, the exact shade of brown of their eyes. It all fluttered down in a chaotic, slow-motion cascade, scattering across the cold, tiled floor of my mother-in-law's powder room. "No," I whispered. The word was a croak. "No, no." I scrambled forward on my hands and knees. My dress, my expensive navy wrap dress that was supposed to be my armor, dragged across the floor. I watched in horror as the main petition document slid, slowly, inexorably, across the tiles and came to rest with its corner dipping into the small puddle of condensation that had formed around the base of the toilet. I lunged for it. I snatched it up, but the damage was done. A dark, wet watermark was already wicking up the corner of the page, turning the crisp white paper into a translucent gray mush. It wasn't legible text that got ruined, thank God, just the margin. But it looked tainted. It looked messy. It looked like me. I sat back on my heels, clutching the damp paper, surrounded by the debris of my legal motherhood. And then I saw the photo. It had landed face down on the bath mat, the fluffy pink bath mat that I knew for a fact hadn't been washed in 6 months because Susan didn't want to ruin the pile. I picked it up gingerly. There was a piece of lint stuck to Leo's forehead. I brushed it off. I stared at them. Leo, with his serious little frown, and Maya, who looked like she was about to laugh. And that's when the guilt hit me. It hit me harder than Jessica's insult. It was a physical blow to the gut that made me double over. What was I doing? I looked at these innocent faces, these children who had already lost everything once, their birth parents, their stability, and were waiting for us to be their safety, to be their soft place to land. And what was I doing with them? I was turning them into a weapon. I was turning their existence into a gotcha moment to win a dinner table argument against a woman I hated. I wasn't thinking about protecting them. I was thinking about destroying her. I was no better than Jessica. That was the mistake, the fundamental, wrought at the core mistake. I had convinced myself that I was the righteous victim, the noble heroine enduring the slings and arrows of a toxic family. But heroines don't use orphans as ammunition. Heroines don't keep secrets just to maximize the dramatic impact of the reveal. I had told myself I was keeping it secret to protect the process, to avoid the jinx. That was a lie, a bold-faced, self-serving lie. I kept it secret because I wanted this. I wanted the look on their faces. I wanted the power. I had been hoarding this news like a dragon hoards gold, waiting for the precise moment it would buy me the most vindication. I felt sick. Nausea roiled in my stomach, mixing with the roast beef and the bile. I was shaking, tears dripping off my chin and landing on the scattered papers. I was a fraud. I was a bad mother before I had even held them. I started gathering the papers, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I was hyperventilating now, short, sharp gasps. I tried to shuffle the papers back into order, but my hands were sweating, smudging the ink on the home study. I was ruining it. I was ruining everything. Then I heard it. Footsteps outside the door, heavy, deliberate. Mark. My heart leapt. A tiny, pathetic part of me, the part that still believed in fairy tales, thought, he's coming to check on me. He's coming to apologize. He's going to knock on this door and say, Nina, let's go. Screw them. We're leaving. I froze, clutching the messy stack of papers to my chest, waiting for the knock. The knock came. Soft. Tentative. Nina? It was him. But his voice wasn't filled with righteous indignation. It wasn't filled with concern. It was filled with annoyance. It was the voice he used when the dog peed on the rug. Nina, are you in there? He whispered, the sound muffled by the wood. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was closed. Look, he said, and I could hear him leaning against the door, his mouth close to the crack. You need to come out. Mom is really upset. She thinks you're making a scene. I stared at the door. I stared at the brass doorknob. Mom is really upset. Not, are you okay? Not, I can't believe Jessica said that. Not, I love you. Mom is upset. And then the kicker. The misunderstanding that wasn't a misunderstanding at all, but a moment of absolute crystal clear clarity. I heard a second voice. Susan. She must have been standing right down the hall. Mark? She hissed. Is she coming out? The souffle is going to fall. I'm trying, Mom, Mark whispered back, his voice strained. She's just, you know how she gets. She's emotional. It's the history. She's just sensitive right now. Sensitive? I felt something snap inside my chest. It was a distinct sensation, like a rubber band breaking. He called me sensitive, after his sister just eviscerated me, after she mocked the dead children I had carried in my body, children he had mourned with me, or so I thought. He was out there, apologizing for my reaction to her cruelty. He was managing me. He was handling the Nina problem so his mother's souffle wouldn't deflate. I wasn't a partner to him. I was a liability. The guilt about weaponizing the twins evaporated. It burned away in a flash of white-hot, purifying fury. If they wanted a scene, I would give them a production. If they wanted me to be the emotional, broken woman, I would show them exactly what a mother fighting for her children looked like. I looked at the mirror. My reflection was a disaster. My eyes were swollen, red-rimmed. My mascara had run, leaving jagged black streaks down my cheeks. My lipstick was chewed off. My hair was escaping its bun in wild, frizzy tendrils. I didn't fix it. I didn't wipe the mascara. I didn't smooth the hair. I wanted to look like this. I wanted to look like the wreckage they had created. I wanted to be the ghost at the feast. I stood up. I shoved the papers back into the folder. They were out of order. The damp corner was sticking out. The photo was crooked. It didn't matter. The perfection was gone, replaced by something rawer, something truer. I wasn't doing this for vengeance anymore. I was doing this for survival. I was doing this to sever the tie. Because the moment I walked out that door and dropped this bomb, I knew with a terrifying certainty that I was burning the bridge. I was ending the relationship with his family, maybe even with him. And I was okay with that. I looked at the door handle. It was cold metal. I gripped it. My palm was sweaty, so it slipped a little. I tightened my grip. "Nina," Mark said again from the other side, "please, just come sit down. We can leave early. Just finish dinner." Finish dinner. I unlocked the door. Click. I didn't open it gently. I didn't peek out. I yanked it open. Mark was standing there, leaning in, and he almost stumbled forward. He looked at me, and his eyes went wide. He saw the face, the mascara tracks, the wild eyes. "Jesus, Nina," he breathed, reaching out a hand to, what, touch me? Restrain me? "I look like a mother," I said. My voice was raspy, low, unrecognizable to my own ears. I pushed past him. I didn't walk. I marched. I felt the air rushing past me. The hallway seemed to stretch and warp, the family photos on the walls blurring into meaningless shapes. I could hear the clinking of silverware from the dining room. They were eating. They were actually eating. While I was on the floor of the bathroom clutching pictures of orphans, they were eating roast beef. I turned the corner into the dining room. The scene was almost pastoral. Susan was pouring wine, Bob was chewing, Jessica was laughing, head thrown back, hand on her belly, basking in the glow of her fertility. They stopped when they saw me. The laughter died. The chewing stopped. I stood at the head of the table opposite Bob. I slammed the folder down on the table. It hit the wood with a heavy, wet thwack. The water glass next to it wobbled. "Nina," Susan quavered, clutching the wine bottle to her chest like a crucifix. I didn't look at her. I looked at Jessica. I locked eyes with her. "You think you're the only one?" I asked. I was trembling, my whole body shaking, but my voice was getting louder, climbing the register. "You think your biology makes you special? You think because your body works and mine doesn't, that you win?" "Nina, stop," Mark said from behind me. He grabbed my arm. I ripped my arm away. "Don't you touch me," I snarled at him. "Don't you dare touch me. You stood there and let her gut me." I turned back to the table. I flipped the folder open. The papers spilled out again, messy, chaotic, beautiful. I grabbed the photo of the twins. I held it up. My hand was shaking so bad the twins looked like they were vibrating. "We're adopting twins next month," I announced. The words tore out of my throat. "We're adopting twins next month" didn't just hang in the air. They sucked the oxygen right out of the room, creating a vacuum so intense I thought the windows might implode. I held the photo of Leo and Maya up, my hand trembling not from fear anymore, but from the sheer electric voltage of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. It was a vibration that started in my marrow and shook me until my teeth chattered. I watched them look. I watched their eyes dart from my ravaged, mascara-stained face to the glossy rectangle in my hand. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. The moment of impact, the crumpling of metal, the realization of irreversible damage. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. It was a tableau of suburban horror. Susan's wineglass was tilted dangerously to the left, a trickle of Chardonnay threatening to stain the tablecloth she prized more than her dignity. Bob's fork was suspended halfway to his mouth, a piece of roast beef impaled on the tines, dripping gravy onto his plate. Drip, drip. And Jessica? Jessica looked like someone had slapped her across the face with a wet fish. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide, the smugness that had been plastered there all evening momentarily fractured by confusion. She blinked. Once, twice, trying to process the data, trying to fit this new variable into her equation where she was the winner and I was the loser. "What?" Jessica whispered. It wasn't a question, it was a malfunction. "Twins," I repeated, and my voice sounded stronger now, anchoring itself in the reality of the paper I held. Leo and Maya, they are 6 months old. They are in foster care, and in 28 days, they are going to be ours. I tossed the photo onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, spinning slightly, and came to rest right in front of the centerpiece, staring up at them. 2 beautiful, brown-eyed babies who had no idea they were currently detonating a family dinner in Connecticut. Susan let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She reached a hand out toward the photo but didn't touch it, as if it were hot. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Twins? Nina? Mark? Why didn't you tell us?" She looked at Mark. They all looked at Mark. And this is where the knife twisted. This is where the last thread of my marriage frayed to the point of snapping. Mark was standing beside me, but he wasn't with me. He was shrinking. He was hunching his shoulders, looking at his mother with the terrified eyes of a child who had been caught breaking a vase. He wasn't proud. He wasn't standing tall next to his wife, saying, "Yes, look at this miracle we made." He was doing damage control. "We were going to tell you," Mark stammered, rubbing the back of his neck, his face flushing a mottled red. We wanted to wait until everything was finalized. You know how complex these things are." "Complex?" I spun on him. The movement was so sharp, my hair whipped across my face. "Is that what we're calling it, Mark?" I looked back at the table, my eyes locking onto Jessica. She had recovered from her initial shock and was now scrambling to regain the high ground. I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. She picked up her cider, took a sip, and set it down with a sharp clack. "Well," Jessica said, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet condescension that she wore like perfume, "that is certainly a surprise. Adopting. Wow, that's noble of you, Nina. Noble." She said it like it was a consolation prize, like I was picking up trash on the side of the highway. "It's not noble," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "It's parenting. It's becoming a mother, something you think I'm incapable of." Jessica rolled her eyes. She actually rolled them. "I didn't say you were incapable, Nina. You're so dramatic. I just said we can have children naturally. It's a biological fact. There's no need to get hysterical and ruin dinner just because you're sensitive about your situation." Hysterical. That was it. The dam broke. The reservoir of 5 years of biting my tongue, of smiling through baby showers, of nodding politely while they gave me unsolicited advice about ovulation kits and relaxing vacations, it all came crashing down. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, a dark, jagged thing that clawed its way out of my throat. Sensitive? I asked, stepping closer to the table. I placed my hands on the wood, leaning in until I was looming over the roast beef. You sit there, pregnant with your second child, and you look me in the eye? Me, the woman who has washed blood out of her sheets 3 times, the woman who has held tiny, lifeless hopes in the palm of her hand, and you tell me I'm unlike some people who can actually have children? You mocked my grief. You used my tragedy as a stepping stool to make yourself feel taller. I grabbed the folder again, clutching it like a weapon. I kept it secret, I announced, my voice rising, filling the room, bouncing off the beige walls and the china cabinet. I kept it secret not because it was complex, Mark. I kept it secret because I didn't want this. I didn't want her poison touching them. I pointed a shaking finger at Jessica. I kept it secret because some people don't deserve to know. Some people don't deserve to share in the joy of these children because they don't understand what a miracle is. They think children are trophies. They think fertility is a character trait. Susan was crying now, openly weeping into her napkin. "Nina, please," she wailed, "don't say that." "Family?" I laughed again. It sounded wild. "Family doesn't watch you bleed and tell you to get over it. Family doesn't sit silently while you are being gutted at the dinner table." I looked at Mark. He was staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "Family protects you." I looked back at Jessica. She looked furious now. Her face was tight, her lips a thin white line. "You are being incredibly selfish," she hissed, "ruining my announcement with this stunt. You just couldn't stand the attention being on me for 1 second, could you?" I stared at her. I really looked at her. And for the first time in years, I didn't see the perfect sister-in-law with the perfect life. I saw a small, insecure bully. And I felt nothing. No envy, no desire to please. Just a cold, hard resolve. I picked up the photo of the twins one last time. I looked at Leo's serious little face. I looked at Maya's smile. They were mine. They were my world, and I was the gatekeeper. "You think this is a stunt?" I whispered. The room went deadly silent. Even Susan stopped sobbing to listen. "This isn't a stunt, Jessica. This is a boundary." I leaned in closer until I was just inches from her face. I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. "You'll never meet them," I said. The words were simple, 4 syllables, but they landed with the weight of a judge's gavel. "Excuse me?" Jessica scoffed, leaning back. "Don't be ridiculous. They're my niece and nephew. Of course I'll meet them." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You won't. You will never hold them. You will never buy them a birthday present. You will never hear them call you auntie, because I will not let people who treat their mother like garbage anywhere near them. I will not let them grow up watching you belittle me and thinking that's how family treats each other." I looked around the table. At Bob, who looked like he was having a stroke. At Susan, who looked devastated. At Mark, who looked like a ghost. "None of you," I said, my voice trembling with the finality of it, "until you learn how to respect me, until you learn how to stand up for me, you don't get access to my joy. You don't get the twins." I straightened up. I felt light, incredibly, impossibly light. The weight of the secret, the weight of their expectations, the weight of the silence, it was all gone. "Mark," I said, without looking at him, "are you coming?" The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It was the longest 3 seconds of my life. I was giving him a lifeline. I was giving him one last chance. To choose me, to choose Leo and Maya, to choose the family we were building over the family that had broken him. Mark looked up. He looked at his mother, weeping into her hands. He looked at his father, stony-faced. He looked at Jessica, who was glaring at him, daring him to leave. "Nina," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "can't we just Can't we talk about this? You're upset. Let's just sit down and—" "No," I cut him off. My heart shattered. Quietly, without fanfare. It just broke into 2 clean pieces. "I'm not upset, Mark. I'm done." I zipped up my tote bag. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Zzz. I turned on my heel. I didn't look back. I walked out of the dining room. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. The sound of a woman walking away from a burning building. I walked down the hallway, past the family photos where Mark smiled in every single one, the dutiful son. I walked past the living room with the beige furniture. I opened the front door. The cool night air hit my face, drying the tears instantly. It smelled of dead leaves and rain. It smelled like freedom. I walked to the car. I didn't get in the passenger side. I walked to the driver's side. I realized I had the keys in my pocket. I always carried the spare set. I got in. I threw the bag on the passenger seat. Mark's seat. The seat that was empty now. I started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw the front door open. Mark stood there, silhouetted by the warm light of the hallway. He took a step out onto the porch, raising a hand. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I put the car in drive and pulled away. I drove down the street, past the manicured lawns and the perfect houses. I merged onto the main road. I turned on the radio. It was static. I didn't change it. The white noise was perfect. I was alone. I was driving a Honda Civic into the dark. My husband was back there, in that house, eating roast beef with the people who hated me. But then I looked at the passenger seat, at the bag, at the folder inside. Leo and Maya. I wasn't alone. I reached over and placed my hand on the leather bag. I could feel the shape of the folder through the material. "We're going home," I whispered to the empty car. "We're going home to get ready for you." And for the first time in 5 years, as I drove through the blurred streetlights of suburbia, I smiled. A real smile. A terrified, heartbreaking, exhilarating smile. Because the worst had happened, the explosion had happened, and I was still standing. I was driving toward my children, and nobody, not Jessica, not Susan, not even Mark, could stop me. The house was dark when I pulled into the garage. Usually, seeing the house completely unlit gives me a pang of loneliness, a reminder of the life that isn't waiting for me behind the front door. But that night, as the garage door rumbled shut behind me, sealing me into the concrete tomb of my own sanctuary, the darkness felt like a blanket. It felt protective. I sat in the car for a long time, 10 minutes, 20. The engine ticked as it cooled, a metallic metronome counting down the seconds of my new life. I stared at the odometer. 84,302 miles. It seemed impossible that the car had the same mileage as it did when we left for dinner. I felt like I had traveled light years. I had aged a decade between the salad course and the roast beef. My phone was vibrating in the cup holder. Zzz, zzz, zzz. A relentless, angry insect. I didn't look at it. I knew who it was. It was Mark. It was Susan. It was the chorus of people who had demanded my silence for years, now demanding my attention. I reached over, pressed the side button, and silenced it. The relief was instantaneous. I grabbed the tote bag. It felt heavier now, weighted not just with paper, but with destiny. I unlocked the door into the mudroom and stepped inside. The smell of our house hit me. Coffee grounds, lemon floor cleaner, and that faint, underlying scent of Mark's cedar cologne. It made my stomach turn. It smelled like a lie. I walked through the kitchen, not turning on the lights, guided only by the moonlight spilling across the hardwood floors. I saw the empty coffee mug Mark had left on the counter that morning, the ring of brown stain on the white ceramic. I picked it up. I walked to the trash can. I dropped it in. Thunk. It didn't break, which was disappointing, but the finality of the sound was satisfying enough. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My body was humming with a chemical cocktail of cortisol and caffeine. I went upstairs to the spare room, the room we had optimistically called the guest room for 5 years, but which had really been a shrine to our failures. It was piled with boxes of exercise equipment we never used and winter coats we hated. I stood in the doorway, flipping the light switch. The stark overhead bulb illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. This was it. This was the space. I didn't see the junk anymore. I saw 2 cribs. I saw a changing table. I saw a rocking chair in the corner where I would learn the rhythm of my children's breathing. I started moving things at 1 a.m. I dragged the elliptical machine into the hallway, scratching the floorboards. I didn't care. I shoved boxes of Mark's old college textbooks down the stairs. I was possessed. I needed to purge the space. I needed to scrub the history from the walls to make room for the future. By 4 a.m., the room was empty. I sat in the center of the floor, sweating, my navy dress ruined, my makeup a horror show, and I pulled the folder out of the bag again. I laid the papers out on the floorboards. I traced the names. Leo. Maya. I spoke to them. "I'm getting it ready," I whispered into the empty room. "I'm making it safe for you." The next 3 days were a blur of manic productivity and deafening silence. Mark didn't come home that first night. He stayed at his parents', I assumed. Coward. He sent texts, hundreds of them. They started angry. "How could you do that?" Then shifted to bargaining. "We need to talk about this rationally." And finally settled into a pathetic, whimpering pleading. "I miss you, Nina. Please pick up." I read them with a clinical detachment, like I was reading a case study of a stranger's dissolving marriage. I didn't reply. What was there to say? The conversation had ended when he let his sister call me broken. Every time I thought about typing a response, I saw his face looking at the floor while I bled out emotionally. I saw his hesitation on the porch. That hesitation was the answer to every question I had ever asked about our love. On Tuesday, I took a personal leave from work. I drove to the paint store. I didn't want pink or blue. I wanted life. I chose a soft, mossy green, the color of new ferns unfurling in a damp forest. I spent the entire day painting the nursery, rolling the color over the sterile beige that Susan had recommended years ago. The physical rhythm of painting, dip, roll, spread, dip, roll, spread, was meditative. It smoothed out the jagged edges of my mind. As I painted, I cried. Not the hysterical sobbing of the dinner party, but a slow, steady release. I mourned the marriage I thought I had. I mourned the years I wasted trying to fit into a family that saw me as a defective incubator. But with every stroke of the roller, I was covering up the past. I was sealing it away. Mark finally came by on Wednesday evening. I saw his car pull into the driveway from the nursery window. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from love, but from the primal instinct to protect my territory. I walked downstairs to meet him. I didn't unlock the door. I waited for him to use his key. He walked in, looking haggard. He was wearing the same clothes from the dinner, rumpled and stained. He looked 10 years older. He stopped when he saw me standing at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, wearing paint-splattered leggings. "Nina," he breathed, stepping forward. "Thank God. I didn't know if you were here." "I live here," I said. My voice was flat. "For now." He looked around the hallway, noticing the elliptical machine jammed against the wall, the boxes of his books by the door. What is all this?" "I'm making room," I said. "The twins are coming on the 15th. I need the space." He flinched. "The twins? Nina, are you really doing this without talking to me?" "I am doing this," I corrected him. "You are welcome to do whatever you want. But Leo and Maya are coming here. That is happening. If you want to be their father, you need to decide right now if you're capable of standing up to your family. Because if you let Jessica or your mother near them with that toxicity, I will file for divorce so fast your head will spin." He rubbed his face. They're hurt, Nina. Mom is devastated. She says you banned her from seeing her grandchildren." "I banned her from seeing children she doesn't respect," I said. "And the fact that you're here advocating for her feelings instead of asking how I am, that tells me everything, Mark." He stood there for a long, agonizing minute. I watched the struggle on his face, the conflict between the man he wanted to be and the boy his mother had raised. "I just need some clothes," he whispered finally. "Okay," I said. "Take what you need." I watched him walk up the stairs. I didn't follow him. I heard him opening drawers in our bedroom, the sound of the zipper on his suitcase. It sounded like a body bag being closed. He came down 10 minutes later, a duffel bag over his shoulder. He stopped at the door. "I love you, Nina," he said, his voice cracking. "I know you do," I answered honestly. "You just don't love me enough to protect me." He left. The door clicked shut. And for the first time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt cleansed. The next 2 weeks were a marathon of logistics. I met with the social worker alone. I signed the final papers alone. When she asked about Mark, I told her the truth. We are separated. I am proceeding as a single parent. She looked at me over her glasses, assessed the steel in my spine, and nodded. She saw it. She saw that I was more ready now than I had ever been when I was part of a couple. I bought diapers. I bought formula. I assembled 2 cribs by myself, stripping 3 screws and bruising my knuckles, swearing like a sailor the whole time. Every bruise was a badge of honor. I was building this life with my own 2 hands. And then the day came. November 15th. The sky was a slate gray, threatening snow, but I didn't feel the cold. I stood on the front porch, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself, watching the street. A sedan pulled up. The agency logo was on the side door. My heart stopped. It literally stopped beating for a second. The car door opened, the social worker stepped out, and then she reached into the back. She pulled out a carrier, then another. I ran down the steps. I didn't care about dignity. I ran to the car. "Here they are," she smiled, handing me the first carrier. I looked down through the mesh. Leo, he was asleep, his little fist curled up by his ear, his eyelashes resting against his cheek. I felt a sob rip through me, so violent it almost knocked me over. This was real. This wasn't a stick with 2 pink lines. This wasn't a grainy ultrasound. This was a human being, a weight, a warmth. "Hi," I choked out. "Hi, baby." We got them inside. The social worker stayed for an hour, going over paperwork, schedules, feeding times. I nodded, absorbing everything, but my brain was mostly just white noise and love. When she finally left, the silence of the house was broken. It was shattered in the most beautiful way. Maya started crying first, a thin, high-pitched wail that demanded attention. I picked her up. She was warm, solid, smelling of milk and baby powder. I sat in the rocking chair, the one I had placed in the corner of the green room, and I held her. Leo was still sleeping in his crib. I looked down at Maya. She opened her eyes. They were dark, deep, unclouded by the world. She looked at me. She didn't know about the dinner party. She didn't know about the miscarriages. She didn't know that her new mother was a woman who had just blown up her entire life to get here. She just knew that she was being held. "We're going to be okay," I told her. "We're going to be so loud. We're going to be so happy." That was 6 months ago. My life now is unrecognizable. The pristine house is gone, replaced by a chaotic landscape of toys, burp cloths, and half-folded laundry. I haven't slept more than 4 hours in a row since they arrived. My hair is always in a messy bun, and I usually have spit up on my shoulder. I am exhausted in a way that goes down to my bones, and I have never been more alive. The divorce is almost final. Mark visits sometimes, on weekends, supervised. He sits on the floor and plays with them, looking sad and distant, like a visitor in a museum. He missed the moment. He missed the transformation. He sees the work. He doesn't feel the joy. We are polite. We are strangers who share a history, but not a future. Susan sends cards. I return them unopened. Jessica, well, I heard through the grapevine that she had her baby. A girl. I hope she's happy. I hope that child softens her. But I will never know. And that boundary, that hard, unyielding line I drew in the sand that night, is the most loving thing I have ever done for myself. I think a lot about that biological comment. Unlike some people, we can actually have children. She was right, in a twisted way. Biology is a function. It's plumbing. It's chemistry. But being a mother, that isn't biology. That is a choice. It is the decision to rip your heart out of your chest and let it walk around outside your body. It is the ferocity to burn bridges to protect the innocent. It is the strength to stand alone in a nursery at 4 a.m., painting the walls green, believing in a future you haven't met yet. I look at Leo and Maya now, rolling on the rug, laughing at a shadow on the wall, and I realize that the family I was trying so hard to fit into was never my family. My family didn't start until I walked out that door. So if you're listening to this and you're holding on to a secret or a pain or a person who makes you feel small, let it go. Scream it at a dinner table if you have to. Flip the table. Drive away. Because there is a life waiting for you on the other side of your fear. There is a love that doesn't ask you to be quiet. And there are people who will look at you, broken, messy, crying you, and think you are the whole entire world.